Welcome to the Victims Advocate podcast, where we explore current events, crime, security, and insights into advocacy for victims of violent crime. My name is Brandon Stein, and I am the Victims Advocate. Helping victims of violent crime is what I do, and you can find me at www.steinlaw.com or www.victimadvocate.com. Let's hit it. David Bolton is here. David I've known for years upon years, but David is a master investigator, owns his own company. I could go through your practice description and what you do, David, but if you weren't here, I would do it, but you are here. So I want to give you the opportunity, at least just to, detail for me everything that you do, because I'm sure I don't know about everything as it relates to your practice.
Well, I'm sure as yours, my practice has changed over the years, and you have to evolve to stay relevant. So, years ago, I was doing the basic PI stuff, background checks and surveillance, and then slowly I got into accidents against the cruise lines. I was doing a lot of traveling for accidents out of the country in Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and then I got heavily into the precious metal industry. As you may or may not know, Miami's biggest import and export for many years was gold. And I was heavily involved in a lot of cases that involved large thefts. And we were very successful in making recoveries and arrests in a lot of gold cases. And now I've kind of transitioned into high-end thefts and robberies because the gold isn't coming into Miami the way it used to because of federal crackdown on the import of the gold. A lot of it was found to be illegally mined and laundering money for drug traffickers, etc. So my practice now is kind of high-end thefts, robberies. I do a lot with different attorneys for personal injury cases, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
So your practice obviously has evolved over the years. Is there something in particular that led you to, you say precious metals, obviously the common term is gold, and that's a big import-export. Is there something that brought you to that aspect or that niche area of investigations?
Sure. The largest precious metal refinery in the U.S. was located, which a lot of people don't know, here in Opelika. And I had a good relationship with them and a lot of their large clients for over 20 years. And once you have a case and you're successful and make arrests and recoveries, people, they want you, and just kind of snowball from there.
So just so I could understand your practice and where you come into the big picture of things. So let's use the precious gold or the precious metal industry as an example. So someone has an issue, whether it's a robbery or some other type of theft. Do they call you and you come in to locate the actual metal, or do you work with police authorities in collaboration? Explain to me that process and how that works.
Well, that's a great question, because a lot of times you're really the liaison for your client with law enforcement, because a lot of these people are from out of the country or they don't know the system and they need help into where they need to go, what they need to do. And also, if you have contacts that respect you in law enforcement, you're taken a lot more seriously. So that's kind of where I come in as an expert that has experience, that has contacts. I know how to access the system, and as I said, once you're successful in a few cases, you tend to get known in that industry. It's a niche industry. So that's kind of how that evolved.
Yeah, I mean, you turn into the go-to guy. But in terms of contacts, I understand police officers is a very tight-knit group, and they don't want to just give out business or information to just anyone. But is there anything in maybe a former life or what you did previously or any prior work that lends credibility to you as opposed to just some 22-year-old schmo who comes out of college and wants to, talk to police?
Well, I've worked for decades with retired supervisory federal agents, and use their contacts, and I think that's given me, I got the stamp of approval, so to speak. So I think that's given me a lot of credibility. And at this point, my cases speak for themselves. The work I've been able to do and the results I've been able to get from my clients. And I want to emphasize, all of my clients are victims. They're righteous people who've been victimized, and I think it's important a lot of times to assist those people, because if you don't, a lot of times these cases slip through the cracks and there's no justice. So I think that's an important part of it as well. I hate thieves, and I enjoy seeing them get their due.
Yeah, and you're obviously not law enforcement per se, but you're kind of an advocate, if you will. And you are an advocate for the victims.
Sure.
And working with them. And even though they may be well-to-do or well-off or wealthy individuals, they still are victims, and they've lost something valuable. Yeah.
For sure. And, I never take a case where I think the person is a scammer or a fraudster. And I never victimize victims. I give it to them straight. I provide a quality service at a reasonable price. And I think, hopefully we get results for the client. Sometimes I tell them up front, your chances of recovery are 5%. But a lot of times these people, they want to prevent these things from happening again. And in certain industries, it's not just about getting results on this. It's about sending a message that, hey, if you come after me, I'm going after you. I'm going after you criminally. I'm going after you civilly. And, there's going to be a price to pay. So on the contrary, if you don't, a lot of times they think this guy's an easy hit. We'll come back in 6 months and do it again. So it's about maybe making a recovery and also figuring out who was involved. And a lot of times you have insiders involved in these cases that work for you or friends or family or people who work for you, and that's important to understand.
Well, you say reputation. I mean, you were talking just a moment ago about your own reputation, but never mind that. It's the reputation of your clients now, if I'm hearing you correctly, in the community where, hey, if something, a robbery or burglary happens of some really, really valuable metals or anything of that sort, the community, the let's call it the thief community, they need to know not to F with this guy, because guess what? He's going to hire someone like you. He's going to get the authorities involved. He's not going to give up, and they're going to find you. So guess what? Go next door to John Smith, who may not be as aggressive with, advocating for recovery of these metals.
For sure. And a lot of times people in these industries, they started very small. They've grown quickly. They don't understand security. They don't understand the need for security until it's too late. So, we can't turn back the clock, but we can make it better going forward. And that's pretty much what I've tried to do for my clients.
So speaking of your clients, so I'm, in terms of the process, I love process with things. There's a process with everything, right? You wake up in the morning, you have a process for how you get out of the house. You may not realize it, but I brush my teeth, I go to bed, whatever. So when you get a call from a client or a text or an email, is there maybe a step-by-step process that you undertake for every case, and then are there certain specifics with client-related issues that you have to, deviate to your standard, protocol?
I think every case is different. I treat everyone the same in the sense of pricing and respect and attention, but I think every case is different. So it'd be hard to go into details on that, but I gather as much information as I can, and a lot of times I reach out to people who I know and bounce things off of them as they bounce things off of me. And as I said, I've worked and work currently with a lot of brilliant legends in law enforcement, and we enjoy talking about these cases. It's not always about the money. A lot of it at this point, after 35 years, is about the intrigue. It's about the challenge, and something that I really enjoy. So that's kind of where that goes. But for certain, like domestic cases, there's a process. For personal injury cases, there's a process. But generally speaking, if it's a large case that's very complicated with a lot of tentacles, I like to get as much information as I can, digest it, and bounce it off some people that I know.
Yeah, so I guess, there's different buckets, right? So you say personal injury, there's, a large scale, gold trade case or what have you. There's a process that you put into play for each, but really in the end, it's information gathering. The more information, you have, the more powerful you're going to be, and the more adept you're going to be at getting to the bottom of, what the suspect is, who really victimized your client.
For sure. And just a quick example, I had a case where a watch was stolen out of the country in Argentina, And we had an idea of who was involved. After I did some research, I realized there was only one store in Argentina and one store in Miami that had the same owner. And that was the theory that I had very early on. But I was going to go to the store and look for the watch, and I bounced it off a buddy of mine who's in the industry. He's like, "Don't go over there now. In 3 days is the antique show, the Miami Beach Antique Show. All that stuff is packed up. They're going to display it at the show." And sure enough, I went over there, and there was the watch. But that's a quick example of how you bounce things off of people, or people have more knowledge in a certain area than you do, and it's helpful.
And I'd imagine you have to, you got to have a way of speaking to all different types of people. They have to trust you to an extent, because you're not just Google searching, your leads. You have to actually get out there and do grassroots and speak to people. So is there anything in your past or anything that really prepared you for having that skill, to gather information from people?
I think my dad was a great communicator. He was an attorney for 50 years. He was chief prosecutor of war crimes for the South Pacific. My mom was an institution down here as a person who fought for women's rights and equal rights for people. And I think I got those communication skills early on from my parents. But I think how you look, not to be dressing too fancy, not to be dressing too poorly, treating everyone the same. And people know, especially people, minorities, they know instinctively if you respect them, if you trust them. They have radar that you cannot believe because they run up on the street. So when you go into a place, if they can sense, are you afraid? Are you going to treat them with respect? They have a sensory system that's beyond what the normal person would understand. I know you understand that because you deal with these kind of different minorities.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, in this country, or certainly in this state and in South Florida, the lower socioeconomic, class of either minority or non-minority, individual, they're the ones who fall victim to these crimes that at least I handle. But what I will say is, I could imagine that there is a level of fear you have going into maybe some areas and talking to people when they know you're an outsider. They know you don't live there, but you have to go in there with some sort of mentality that, hey, I belong here. I'm comfortable. I'm safe. I'm not a threat to you guys. So I need some info, know?
Sure. I think your body language, your eye contact is important. How you dress, how you speak to people with respect. I think that's very important. But back to something you were saying before about crime in Miami and minorities. Hopefully the minorities in this county will be treated fairly in the near future, the way the political scene is evolving. And as far as witnesses coming forward, victims of crimes, it's something that's a concern to me today. And I'm sure it's going to affect your practice in the future as well as mine.
Yeah, thankfully we're not a political show, but what I will say is, laws certainly drive our progress or our lack of progress.
Sure.
And, many people down here may be fearful of coming forward, even if you're not law enforcement, David, that you're not. They know you're not. So in a sense, you're safe to speak to. But they still see you as an outsider who's coming in. So I could certainly see your job getting a little more challenging moving forward,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's been that way to a small extent in the past, but I think in the near future, we may be seeing a lot more of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a touchy thing because you need them, but at the same point in time, they don't owe you anything.
No,
They don't need to speak to you. So and you're not going in there, hiring them. They're not informants or anything along. You're not law enforcement.
Sure.
So I could certainly see how challenging that can be.
Sure. Well, in some of these cases, you offer rewards, high dollar rewards. And they have to feel comfortable that they're going to be paid and they're going to be kept anonymous and they're not going to be sucked into the system. So that's another thing that's going to certainly be challenging for me in the future.
So you had mentioned earlier, theft of high-end watches, gold. In terms of Listen, I know you've been featured on several media outlets, you know, whether it's American Greed, Rolling Stone magazine, Vanity Fair, for some of these investigations that you've played a role in. Is there a particular investigation that stands out as, wow, that was crazy that I was involved in? I'd imagine the one I think of is always the one that was featured. I think it was the gold mining trade in American Greed, but that's just me. I don't know if there's one that sticks out for you.
That was an interesting case. It was $3 billion of gold that was brought into Miami illegally in 1 year. But the one that really gets me is there was a case that was $2.8 million that was stolen in Coral Gables from a courier. And it turned out that those guys were actually working with the DEA undercover to kidnap who they thought was the highest ranking member of the Zetas in Mexico. And they actually kidnapped this guy, put him on a speedboat off the coast of Isla de Mujeres. It turned out not to be the right guy, and they didn't get their reward. But they were also heavily involved in smuggling the baseball players out of Cuba here for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So one day they're planning the largest gold theft in Florida. The next day they're working with sports agents to bring baseball players, and the next day they're working with the DEA. That was insane. So I think that one is the one that always will stick with me.
So when you're brought into a case like that, is there a singular issue that you're brought in to investigate or look into, or is it just more broad and say, hey, David, find us what you can?
Well, in that case, we really didn't have a lot to start with, but the owner of the precious metal refinery here in Miami contacted me and said, hey, one of my clients got robbed. It was in Coral Gables. See what you can do. So I met with the client. We offered a large reward. We went to the media, and we started to get phone calls. And one identified an individual pretty quickly that was involved. He happened to be wearing a GPS tracking device from a previous robbery, so it wasn't too hard to nail him to the scene of the crime. And then 10 days before that, the actual gold theft, they did a home invasion. Their partner got shot 8 times, survived. He ended up calling me and wanting the $25,000 reward and told me everything we needed to know. So these cases, they have so many tentacles sometimes, and even if you're paid a certain amount to work the job, sometimes it's very hard to get out because you keep getting sucked in somehow. And it's, like I said, I love these cases. They're such a challenge, but sometimes it's hard to let go of them, And even today, I get phone calls from production companies all the time. People wanting to do shows and movies. And the movies have never happened, but a lot of these shows certainly have in the newspaper articles.
Well, I can imagine now with all the streaming and there's a platform for everything.
For sure.
And they just have to keep pushing out content. So I can only imagine. But you mentioned
a lot of these cases are frustrating in the sense that, and I've always said 90% of the people who are arrested in Dade County are not convicted. There was a recent article in the Herald. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
78% of the people, according to FDLE, that are arrested on criminal charges in Dade County are not convicted.
So let me get this straight.
I can read it to you.
If 100 people are arrested, 78 out of the 100 get arrested and go back on the streets for a variety of reasons.
638,000 criminal charges. In the past 10 years in Miami-Dade County, the overwhelming majority, 71%, were dropped, abandoned, or otherwise not prosecuted, according to Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The statewide figure is 39%, which is still very high. So it's a criminal's paradise down there.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's twice as much as the statewide figure.
For sure.
And
these criminals know this. They target certain areas here, New York, California, because of that. And criminals that are coming from out of the country that have been doing their thing there, they bring their game here, and it's like Disneyland because they know they can get caught, they go to jail, spend a night, 2 nights, they're out, and they do it again.
Now, let me ask you, though, in Dade County, is it because the police are not properly investigating? Is it because the state attorneys are not properly prosecuting? Is there any explanation that you can decipher as to why it's nearly twice as much the statewide rate of convictions?
I think it's multifaceted. I think there's political priorities. I also think that You have a state attorney that's handling 350, 400 cases, as detectives are. And I think you're having judges that are making bad decisions. I think that's where we're at. And I think law enforcement has gotten lazy. I think we don't have the same figures in law enforcement that we're used to, the real go-getters that aren't afraid to go out there and work. We have, the coffee sippers that want to sit in behind the computer all day and make phone calls and talk to their friends. And it's not the way it used to be.
No, and listen, and who also gets punished with this is the victims, because the victims of the crime. I mean, listen, they don't get anything if people get locked up, but there are restitution awards. There are, local victim advocates that can pay compensation. That all hangs in the balance. It starts with the police and their investigation, and then handing it off to the prosecution to push the, case across the goal line.
100%. 100%. It's very disappointing when you call a detective and say, "Hey, this is what I've got, and these are the people, and this is the informant. They want to speak with you," and they don't call for 2 weeks. You're like, "What the hell's going on?"
And I see it in what I do. I handle I represent a lot of victims of violent crime. So I speak and deal with detectives all the time, and just to even get them on the phone is impossible. So I'm advocating for the victims. I'm not some victim calling up a detective. I'm actually an attorney doing it. So it's truly an epidemic down here, and I haven't looked into it. I think it would be certainly an interesting case study, but I don't think you're far off. I think you're right on the money with where it starts with the investigations, and then where it finishes with the prosecutions, or doesn't finish.
And I think that's making my profession and yours that much more important. I've seen the way technology has developed, and I think the future of law enforcement is public-private partnership. I think that's where it's at.
Yeah, I mean, and for me, for you, we represent the victims in a sense. So you are truly an advocate for victims. Obviously you're not a lawyer, but you are still advocating for their interests. You're doing the investigation that maybe the public sector cannot do, and it's a necessary evil, but it's something. I think it's where we're going. I agree with you. But listen, there's a million other things I wanted to discuss. I know, you were involved in a Chilean burglary ring. I think you did some investigation around safety and security in schools. Obviously, the theft of high watches. Your resume is extensive, man. So there's not enough time. Obviously, I'd love to have you on again to dive more into those issues.
The Chilean burglary ring is very interesting. I got into that in 2017. Now they're targeting all the celebrities and all the sports guys in California, and that should have been stopped years ago.
Wild.
Yeah.
It's wild stuff, brother. I mean, it's just, and it hits people who you've heard of. It's not these underground people who live under rocks. So, that's why, listen, obviously you're very busy, so I do appreciate you jumping on, man. But there's a million things that you've been involved in. I didn't even go through half the media exposure you've had, where they just want to pick up your investigations or cases that you've been a part of. But I do appreciate. I've known you for.
Yours are pretty interesting too, Brandon.
Yeah. Well, listen, not as interesting as a Chilean drug ring or smuggling baseball players from Cuba. I'll tell you that much. But. Listen, well, let me do this for you, at least. What I'd like to make sure all the listeners know is, if they need you, how do they find you? What's the best way to get David Bolton?
Well, they can find my website, boltoninvestigations.com. That's probably the best way to hook up with me.
All right, perfect. Well, David Bolton, listen, brother, I appreciate it. I appreciate the time. It was a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff. I think it's super interesting. I think it's it's made for TV drama, that's for sure.
For sure. Enjoyed it, Brandon. Thank you very much.
All right, appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Brandon Stein, and I am the Victim's Advocate. Your voice matters, and if you or someone you know needs representation, visit steinlaw.com or victimadvocate.com for more information. See you next time.